The morning sun had barely touched the city streets when people began to rush past the man sitting near the corner of the old bus station. His clothes were worn out, his hair tangled, and a small blanket was wrapped tightly around his shoulders. Every day he sat in the same spot, quiet and still, almost invisible to the crowd that moved around him. Some would glance at him with pity, others with disgust, but most didn't notice him at all. To them, he was just another man who had lost his way. He never begged for money. Instead, he spent hours walking along the back alleys, collecting empty bottles and cans from the trash bins. His hands were rough, his fingers marked by years of work that no one remembered anymore. When his small bag filled up, he would walk to the recycling center and trade the bottles for a few coins. That was enough for a loaf of bread, a cup of coffee, maybe a can of soup if the day went well. The man had a small routine. Each morning he'd fold his blanket neatly and tuck it into his worn-out backpack. He'd then wash his face in the public restroom near the park, comb his hair with his fingers, and hum a tune that no one recognized. The tune was soft, gentle, and filled with emotion. People sometimes heard it as they walked by, but they never paid attention. They were too busy with their own lives. He was different from most who lived on the streets. He didn't drink, didn't shout, didn't ask for favors. When people insulted him or told him to move away, he simply nodded and left quietly. There was something calm about him, something almost graceful, like a man who once knew peace but had lost it along the way. One morning, the wind was cold, and the sky was gray. The man sat near a small cafe, holding a paper cup filled with lukewarm coffee he had bought with his last few coins. Inside the cafe, laughter and the smell of fresh pastries filled the air. He could hear it through the glass, and sometimes he watched the people inside. They seemed happy. Families, friends, couples, talking about their plans, their jobs, their dreams. He didn't feel angry at them. He simply wondered if he had ever looked like that, full of life, full of hope. The cafe's door opened, and a young woman came out carrying a tray of leftover bread. She placed it on the counter outside for anyone who needed it. The man waited until she went back in, then walked over quietly and took a single piece. He whispered a small thank you under his breath, even though no one heard him. Every day for the next few weeks he passed by that cafe. Sometimes he found bread, sometimes nothing. Once the same young woman saw him looking through the basket and smiled at him. It wasn't pity, just a small, kind smile that caught him off guard. He smiled back shyly, then walked away. For a long time, no one had looked at him like that, with kindness instead of judgment. The streets were not kind to people like him. Children laughed, adults avoided eye contact, and shop owners shouted at him if he lingered too long near their doors. One afternoon, as he rested near the fountain in the park, two men threw an empty cup at him and laughed. He didn't respond. He just lowered his head and waited for them to leave. When they did, he picked up the cup and threw it into the trash bin nearby. He had learned that silence was his best defense. At night, he slept under the old bridge near the railway tracks. It wasn't comfortable, but it was quiet, and he liked the sound of trains passing in the distance. Sometimes, when the night was still, he'd hum that same soft tune, the one that carried pieces of his past. It was the only thing that reminded him of who he used to be. He could almost see himself again years ago, standing under bright lights, surrounded by people who clapped for him. But then he'd open his eyes, and the cold wind would remind him where he was now. Despite everything, he carried himself with a strange sense of dignity. When other homeless men argued or begged loudly, he stepped aside. He believed that even without money or a home, a person could still have manners, could still be human. Every morning, before leaving his sleeping spot, he folded his blanket as neatly as he could, arranged his few things, and whispered a small prayer of gratitude for surviving another day. One cold evening, as he walked past the cafe again, he noticed the young woman sweeping the steps. She looked up and said softly, "You can take more bread if you need to." "There's plenty." He nodded, unsure of what to say. Her voice was warm, almost musical. For a moment, he wanted to tell her something, maybe thank her properly or share that her small kindness meant more than she could imagine. But the words never came out. Instead, he just smiled and said, "Thank you, miss." Then he walked away, carrying the bread carefully like it was something precious. That night, as he ate under the bridge, he thought about her smile. It had been so long since someone had treated him like a person. Most days he felt like a shadow, like part of the street itself. But that small gesture had made him feel alive again, even if just for a moment. The days turned into weeks and the cold began to settle deeper into the city. People wrapped themselves in thick coats and scarves. The man's blanket was no longer enough to keep him warm at night. He shivered as he tried to sleep, his hands trembling, his breath visible in the air. Still, he didn't complain. He had seen worse winters. He had learned how to survive. One afternoon, while collecting bottles near the park, he saw a child drop a small toy. The boy didn't notice and kept walking with his mother. The man picked it up and ran after them, calling out, "Excuse me! You dropped this!" The mother turned, startled, and quickly pulled her son closer. For a moment, fear flashed across her face, but when she saw the toy in his hand, her expression softened. "Thank you," she said quietly, taking it from him. The boy smiled and waved. The man nodded, then turned back toward the park. It was a small thing, but it made him feel good. He still had something kind left inside him. Later that evening, as the sun went down, the young woman from the cafe saw him again. She noticed the way he carried himself, quiet, polite, never causing trouble. There was something about him she couldn't explain. Something that didn't fit the picture most people had of a homeless man. She began leaving extra food out every night, always hoping he would find it before someone else did. The man didn't know it yet, but his life was about to change. The city that had ignored him for years would soon learn who he really was. But for now, he was just a man trying to make it through another cold night. One who hummed soft melodies no one recognized. One who still believed, deep down, that people could be kind if they only looked past what they saw on the outside. Under the bridge, the sound of trains echoed through the darkness. The man lay down, pulled the blanket over his shoulders, and closed his eyes. In his dreams, he wasn't sitting on the cold ground anymore. He was on a stage again, holding his instrument, the crowd silent and waiting. The music flowed from his hands like light, filling the room with warmth. For a few moments, everything was perfect again. And then the sound of the city returned, pulling him back to reality. The morning would come soon, and with it another day of being unseen. But somewhere deep in his heart, a quiet voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, someone would finally see him for who he truly was. The cold mornings were getting harder, but the man had found a small bit of comfort in his daily visits near the cafe. The young woman who worked there had a kind face, and though she never said much, her small acts of care made the days a little less heavy. Some mornings, she left a cup of warm tea near the back door. Other times she placed a few sandwiches on the counter outside, pretending she had made too many. She never asked him any questions, and he never asked for more. They had a silent understanding. He started timing his walks so that he would pass the cafe just as she was finishing her shift. Sometimes she waved, sometimes she only smiled. That small exchange became the brightest part of his day. He didn't know why she bothered to help him when most people didn't even look at him, but he was grateful. Her kindness was like a small light in his dark world. One evening, as the sky turned orange and the streets began to empty, he noticed her sitting alone on the cafe steps. She looked tired, rubbing her hands together to keep warm. For a moment he hesitated to approach, not wanting to make her uncomfortable, but when she saw him, she smiled and said, "It's getting cold, isn't it?" Her voice was gentle, and he nodded, standing a few steps away. She handed him a paper cup of hot coffee. "This one's on the house," she said softly. He held it carefully, the warmth spreading through his hands. "You shouldn't waste your coffee on me," he said quietly. She shook her head. "It's not a waste." For a few minutes they sat there in silence, watching people hurry by. Then she asked, "And do you always hum when you walk?" He looked surprised. "You hear that?" She nodded. "Every morning. It sounds peaceful." He smiled faintly. "It's an old tune. Something from another life." He didn't mean to say that much, but her eyes were curious in a kind way, not judging. "You play music?" she asked. He hesitated, then said, "I used to." His voice grew softer. "Long ago." He didn't say more, and she didn't push for answers. She only nodded, as if she understood that some stories were too heavy to tell all at once. Over the next few weeks, their brief talks continued. He began to share small pieces of his past without realizing it. He told her he once lived in another city, that he had worked with music, and that he had traveled a lot when he was younger. When she asked, "What kind of music?" he simply said, "The kind that can make people cry without saying a word." She smiled at that, imagining him playing something beautiful. But every time she tried to ask more, he changed the subject. He still kept his days simple, collecting bottles, cleaning himself up in the park restroom, folding his blanket neatly each morning. But now he carried a little more hope. The world still ignored him, but he no longer felt completely invisible. There was at least one person who saw him as a human being. One afternoon, the wind was so strong that people hurried past with their coats pulled tight. The man struggled to keep his balance as he pushed his cart of bottles toward the recycling center. The young woman saw him from inside the cafe and quickly stepped out to help. "Let me hold that," she said, grabbing the edge of the cart before it tipped. He looked embarrassed. "You shouldn't do that," he said. "It's heavy," she smiled. "I've carried worse things in this job." Together they steadied the cart and walked it a few steps until the wind eased. He thanked her quietly. She brushed a strand of hair from her face and said, "You remind me of my grandfather. He always said dignity isn't about what you have. It's about how you live." He thought about those words long after she went back inside. That night, he sat under the bridge holding the cup she had given him earlier. He could still smell the faint scent of coffee and cinnamon. He looked up at the stars and whispered, "Maybe there's still some good left in this world." Then he closed his eyes and tried to remember the melody he used to play, the one that once filled grand halls and made people cry. His fingers moved in the air as if touching invisible strings. A few days later, something unusual happened. As he walked by the cafe, a small crowd had gathered outside. A street performer was singing and people were clapping along. The man stopped and listened from a distance. The music pulled at something deep inside him. Without realizing it, he began to hum along, perfectly matching the notes. The young woman noticed him standing there, his eyes closed, lost in the melody. After the song ended, she walked over and said, "You have a beautiful voice." He chuckled softly. "It's not much. Just old habits." She tilted her head. "You sound like someone who really understands music." He looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "Once upon a time I did." He didn't explain, but that small conversation stayed with her. Later, she searched the internet for local musicians who had disappeared or retired suddenly. She didn't know what she was looking for, but something told her this man's story was bigger than what he let on. One rainy evening, when the cafe was about to close, she noticed him sitting under the awning, shivering. Without a word, she brought him a dry coat that someone had left in the lost and found box. "You'll freeze out there," she said. He hesitated, then took it with both hands. The fabric was soft, warm, and far too nice for him. "I can't take this," he murmured. She shook her head. "Please. It's not doing any good sitting in a box." He smiled weakly and said, "Thank you. This reminds me of my old days in the orchestra." The words slipped out before he could stop them. She blinked. "Orchestra?" He froze, realizing what he had said. "Yes," he whispered, "a long time ago." But before she could ask more, he stood up and walked into the rain, disappearing down the street. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. Orchestra. The way he spoke, the way he carried himself, it all made sense now. He wasn't like the others who lived on the streets. There was something refined about him, something careful and deliberate. The next morning, she searched again online, this time for missing or forgotten orchestra musicians from the city. There were a few old articles, but none with pictures clear enough to be sure. Still, she kept wondering. Meanwhile, the man sat in his usual spot near the bus station, watching the city move around him. He felt different these days. Maybe it was because someone cared enough to listen, or maybe it was because, for the first time in years, he had spoken aloud about the orchestra. A part of himself he thought he'd buried forever. The memory hurt, but it also warmed him. It reminded him that he had once meant something, that his hands had once created beauty. As the days passed, the bond between them grew quietly stronger. She began leaving a newspaper near his spot, folded neatly with a note that said, "Stay warm." He didn't always read it, but he kept every note. He carried them in his backpack alongside his blanket and a few coins. Then one morning, everything changed. As he was helping an old woman who had tripped on the sidewalk, someone nearby took a picture. The photo showed him kneeling beside her, his face calm and kind, holding her hand as she smiled. It was a simple moment, but when the picture appeared online, people started talking about it. The caption read, A homeless man helps a stranger when no one else would. The photo spread fast, reaching thousands of people in just a few hours. The young woman saw it later that day while scrolling through her phone. Her heart skipped a beat. There he was, the quiet man from the cafe, the one everyone ignored. Now the whole city was seeing what she had seen all along. She looked out the window toward his usual spot, but he wasn't there. She didn't know it yet, but that photo was about to open the door to his hidden past and change everything for both of them. The photo spread quickly across the internet. At first it was just a local post shared by someone who had been walking by that morning. But within a day, thousands of people had seen it. The image of the man kneeling to help the old woman touched hearts everywhere. People began commenting things like, "He has more kindness than most of us," and "We judge too fast." For the first time in years, his face was being noticed, not as someone to avoid, but as someone to admire. He didn't know about any of this yet. He still sat in his quiet corner near the bus station, sipping his morning coffee and watching people rush past. But he began to feel something different in the way people looked at him. Some smiled, others offered small nods of respect. One woman even handed him a sandwich and said, "You're the man from the photo, right? The one who helped that lady?" He looked puzzled. "Photo?" he asked softly. She showed him on her phone. When he saw the picture, his breath caught for a moment. It was strange to see himself like that. Clean light on his face, a calm expression he didn't even know he still had. He didn't understand why people cared so much about something so simple. "Anyone would have done it," he said quietly. But the woman shook her head. "Not everyone stops to help." At the cafe, the young woman had already seen the photo too. When she realized it was him, her heart filled with pride. She had known there was something special about him, something the world had forgotten to see. That afternoon, when he stopped by as usual, she greeted him with an excited smile. "You're famous," she said. He frowned in confusion. She showed him the news article on her phone, his picture right there for everyone to see. His hands trembled slightly as he looked at it. "I don't want attention," he whispered. "It never ends well." She could tell there was fear behind his eyes, but she gently said, "Maybe this time it will." As the days went on, more reporters began to ask questions. They wanted to know who he was, where he came from, what had happened to him. Some came to the cafe hoping to spot him. He tried to avoid them, but curiosity began to build. One morning, a young journalist approached him politely and asked if she could talk. He wanted to say no, but something in her tone made him pause. She didn't sound like she wanted to use him for a story. She sounded like she truly wanted to understand. They sat at a bench near the park, and she began asking gentle questions. His name, his life before the streets. At first, he kept his answers short, but when she mentioned the way he hummed to himself, he smiled faintly and said, "That tune used to be part of my music." She tilted her head. "You wrote it?" He nodded. "Yes, many years ago I was a musician." He hesitated, looking down. "A cellist," the journalist blinked in surprise. "A professional one?" He sighed. "I used to play for an orchestra. I traveled. I had a family." His voice broke a little. "But life has a way of taking more than you expect." When the article came out a few days later, it carried the headline, "Homeless Man Once Renowned Musician." It included an old photo of him from years ago, one the journalist had found in an archived concert program. He looked so different, clean-shaven, proud, holding a cello in his hands with a faint smile. The story spread like wildfire. People were shocked. Some remembered attending his performances long ago. Others couldn't believe how someone with such talent had ended up on the streets. The young woman at the cafe was amazed when she read it. Everything suddenly made sense. The calm way he moved, his gentle manner, his humming, his quiet dignity. She printed the article and showed it to him. He looked at the paper for a long time, as if seeing a ghost from his past. "I thought that man was gone," he said softly. "But there he is." His eyes filled with tears he didn't bother to hide. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "He's still here," she said kindly. He just needed to be found again. As the news spread, messages poured in from people all over the country. Some offered to help, others shared memories of his concerts. A few even asked if he would play again. But the man didn't answer any of them. He wasn't sure he could. His hands had grown stiff, his back ached, and he hadn't touched an instrument in years. The thought of being on a stage again frightened him. He didn't want pity or fame. He just wanted peace. Still, the story had stirred something inside him. One afternoon, the young woman surprised him with an old cello she'd found at a second-hand store. "It's not perfect," she said, "but I thought maybe you'd like to hold one again." He stared at it as if it were a sacred thing. His hands trembled as he reached out. When his fingers brushed the strings, a tear rolled down his cheek. "I don't know if I remember how," he whispered. She smiled softly. Maybe music never forgets. That evening, he sat behind the cafe after closing, holding the cello close. He pressed the bow against the strings and drew it gently. The first sound was rough, broken, but as he kept going, the notes began to smooth out. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful. The young woman stood by the door, listening quietly. The sound filled the alley like a memory coming back to life. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. The city noises faded, and all that remained was the warmth of the music. Word of his playing reached people quickly. The same journalist who had written his story came back and asked if she could record him. At first, he refused, but she promised it would be simple, just one song, one memory. He agreed, mostly because he wanted to thank the young woman for believing in him. When she filmed him playing that night, it was just the three of them, the man, the cello, and the soft light of a street lamp. He played a piece he had written long ago, something full of sorrow and hope. When the final note faded, there were tears in everyone's eyes. The video was uploaded online, and within hours it reached millions. People from around the world commented, saying his music touched their hearts. Some said it reminded them of lost love, others said it gave them peace. It was as if his pain had become a bridge that connected strangers everywhere. The next morning, a well-known orchestra foundation reached out. They wanted to help him, offering housing, medical care, and a chance to perform again if he wished. He hesitated for a long time. He had lived too long in silence and didn't know if he could return to that world. But when the young woman said, "You don't have to go back to being who you were. You can be someone new," he finally nodded. He agreed to meet them, though his heart raced with fear. The people who once ignored him now looked at him with admiration. It felt strange, almost unreal. As he stood outside the cafe one last time before leaving for the meeting, the young woman handed him a small note. It read, "You were never trash. You were a story waiting to be told." He folded it carefully and placed it in his pocket. When he arrived at the foundation's building, he was nervous, clutching the old cello like a lifeline. But the staff greeted him kindly. They didn't talk about his past mistakes or how far he had fallen. They only said, "Welcome home." For the first time in many years, he felt like he belonged somewhere. That night, he stayed in a clean room with a soft bed and warm blankets. He lay there for hours, unable to sleep, thinking about the strange twist of fate that had brought him back into the world's light. Outside, the city hummed softly, and in the distance, a faint sound of music drifted from somewhere. He smiled, whispering to himself, "Maybe this time the melody won't fade." The man spent his first few days at the foundation feeling like he had stepped into another world. Everything was clean, quiet, and calm. The staff treated him with respect, not pity. They gave him warm meals, clean clothes, and a small room with a bed that felt too soft after years of sleeping on concrete. The first night he lay awake for hours, unsure if he even deserved this kind of comfort. Every sound, the hum of a heater, the rustle of sheets, felt unfamiliar. But as the days passed, he began to breathe easier. The foundation's director visited him one morning. She spoke kindly, asking about his health and his past. When she mentioned that the orchestra community wanted to see him again, he froze. "I don't think I can face them," he said quietly. "I'm not the man they remember." The director smiled gently. "Maybe not, but you're still the man whose music touched hearts. That hasn't changed." He didn't answer, but her words stayed with him. Meanwhile, the young woman from the cafe hadn't seen him since he left for the foundation. She missed their quiet talks and his soft humming that used to drift through the street. One afternoon, she received a message from the journalist who had first written his story. It included a short video. The man was in a music room practicing again. His hands trembled as he played, but the sound was unmistakably beautiful. She smiled through tears. He was coming back to life. At the foundation, he spent hours alone in the practice room. The cello felt both foreign and familiar beneath his fingers. Some days the music flowed easily. Other days, frustration took over when his hands didn't move the way they used to. Years of hardship had stiffened his joints. But each time he wanted to give up, he remembered the cafe worker's words, "You can be someone new." So he kept going, note after note, letting the music rebuild him from the inside out. One afternoon, the director entered the room quietly and listened as he played a slow, haunting melody. When he finished, she clapped softly and said, "There's a charity concert next month for people struggling with homelessness. Would you consider performing?" His first instinct was to refuse. "I can't stand on a stage again," he said. "I don't belong there anymore." She smiled kindly. "Maybe that's exactly why you should. Your story might help others believe in second chances." He didn't respond right away. But later that night, lying in bed, he thought about it over and over. For years he had been invisible. Now maybe he could use his music to help those still living in the shadows. He finally agreed. Over the next few weeks, he practiced every day. The foundation arranged for him to have a new suit and a fresh haircut. When he looked at himself in the mirror for the first time, he hardly recognized the man staring back. The lines on his face told a story of pain and survival, but his eyes were calm again, full of quiet strength. The night before the concert, the director told him, "No one expects perfection. Just play from your heart." He nodded, gripping his cello case tightly. The concert took place in a small community hall. It wasn't a grand stage like the ones he used to play on, but it felt just as important. The audience included people from all walks of life, some wealthy donors, others who had once been homeless like him. The young woman from the cafe sat in the front row, her hands folded nervously. When he stepped onto the stage, a hush fell over the room. For a moment, he felt the old fear creeping back. But then he saw her smile from the crowd and everything settled inside him. He began to play. The first notes were soft and trembling like a whisper. Then the melody grew stronger, fuller. It carried the weight of his years on the streets, the cold nights, the hunger, the loneliness, but also the kindness he had found, the hope that had kept him alive. Each note told a story of falling and rising again. People in the audience leaned forward, their eyes glistening. By the time he finished, there was silence for a heartbeat, and then the room filled with applause. Some stood, clapping through tears. The young woman wiped her face, unable to stop smiling. After the concert, several people came up to him, thanking him for reminding them what true strength looked like. One man who said he had once lived in a shelter whispered, "You gave me hope tonight." The man smiled softly and said, "Music saved me. Maybe it can save you too." That night, as he walked out of the hall, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. The following week, more invitations began to arrive. Different groups wanted him to perform at their events or speak about his life. But he politely turned most of them down. He didn't want fame. He only wanted to help. He started visiting shelters and community centers, playing short pieces and sharing his story with those who felt forgotten. He told them, "I know what it's like to feel invisible, but every one of you still has something beautiful inside. Don't let the world take that from you." Word of his talk spread, and soon he was teaching small music classes for people trying to rebuild their lives. He taught them how to listen, to the rhythm of the world, to the sound of their own heartbeat, to the small moments that make life meaningful. Many of them had never held an instrument before, but he told them that wasn't what mattered. "Music isn't about being perfect," he said. "It's about being honest." The young woman often visited his classes, helping set up chairs or handing out notebooks. They became close friends, bound by quiet understanding. She once asked him if he ever missed his old fame. He shook his head. "No," he said with a small smile. "Fame makes people look at you. Kindness makes them see you. I'd rather be seen." Months passed, and his story continued to inspire others. The cafe that had once been his small refuge now kept a framed photo of him by the counter, a reminder of how a small act of kindness can change a life. People often asked the young woman about him, and she would smile proudly, saying, "He's doing what he was meant to do, helping others find their song again." One evening, after finishing a lesson at the shelter, he walked outside to find the sun setting over the city. The golden light touched the rooftops, and the sound of distant laughter filled the air. He closed his eyes and listened. The world had music everywhere. Even in its silence, a gentle breeze brushed against his face, and he smiled, whispering to himself, "I made it back." He knew life would never be perfect. There would still be hard days and old memories that hurt to remember. But he had found purpose again, and that was enough. The man who had once been treated like trash was now teaching others to see their worth. His past no longer defined him, it guided him. And every night when he played his cello, he felt the same quiet truth echo in his heart, that even the most broken melody can become beautiful again when someone believes it's worth playing. After the concert, his life didn't suddenly become perfect, but it felt lighter. Something inside him had changed. The fear that once ruled his heart had faded. The people who had watched him play that night continued to talk about it for weeks. The story of the man who had lost everything but found himself again through music touched people everywhere. Donations to the foundation increased, and others started volunteering more. But for him, it wasn't about fame, it was about finally feeling human again. He began helping the foundation full-time. Every morning he walked into the building with quiet confidence, greeting others who came seeking help. Some recognized him from the concert and looked at him with awe, but he would simply smile and say, "I'm just like you. I've been where you are." Those words made people listen. They trusted him because he understood their pain. He had lived it. He started teaching small music workshops every week. At first, only a few people showed up, men and women who were too shy to touch the instruments. But slowly more began to come. He taught them not just how to play, but how to feel. "Don't think of the notes," he told them. "Think of what you want to say without words." The music room became a safe space where no one judged anyone. People who had once lost all hope started smiling again. The young woman from the cafe often came to help. She brought coffee and snacks for everyone, and she would sit quietly at the back of the room watching him teach. Sometimes he caught her smiling when he played. There was a quiet connection between them, a bond that didn't need words. She had been the first to treat him kindly when everyone else looked away, and he never forgot that. One evening after class, they walked together through the quiet streets. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement and the air smelled of rain. "Do you ever think about your old life?" she asked softly. He took a moment before answering. "Sometimes, but I don't live there anymore. I used to believe that losing everything meant I was finished. Now I know it was just the beginning." She looked at him with admiration. "You've helped so many people," she said. He smiled faintly. "They've helped me too. Every time I see someone smile again, I feel like another piece of me is healed." Over time, he became something of a quiet legend in the community. People who once avoided the homeless now stopped to talk to them, offer food, or simply listen. His story had opened hearts. One day, a letter arrived from the national orchestra he had once played with. They invited him to attend an event honoring musicians who had made a lasting impact. He hesitated at first, unsure if he belonged in that world anymore. But the foundation director encouraged him to go. "You deserve to be seen," she said. When he arrived at the concert hall, memories came flooding back. The warm lights, the sound of tuning instruments, the quiet buzz of the audience before a performance. Some of the musicians recognized him right away. There were tears, hugs, and disbelief. Many had assumed he was gone forever. One of them said, "We thought we lost you." He smiled softly. "You did, but music brought me back." The orchestra's conductor, an older man with kind eyes, invited him on stage for a few words. The audience fell silent as he stepped forward. He looked around the room and then said, "Years ago I stood on stages like this and played for people who applauded because of the music. But somewhere along the way I forgot why I started playing. I thought success was the goal. It took losing everything to understand that music isn't about applause, it's about connection. It's about healing." His voice trembled slightly as he continued. "There are people outside these doors right now who feel invisible, but they matter. Every one of them does. If my story means anything, let it be a reminder to never look away." The crowd rose to their feet in applause. Many were moved to tears. That night, the orchestra announced a partnership with the foundation to support homeless musicians and provide free lessons to anyone interested in learning. It was a dream he hadn't even imagined coming true. The months that followed were filled with purpose. He spent his days teaching, playing, and mentoring. Every morning he arrived early to tune the instruments, and every evening he stayed late to talk with people who needed someone to listen. He no longer saw himself as a man who had lost everything. He saw himself as someone who had finally found meaning. One afternoon, as he finished a lesson, a young boy approached him shyly, holding a small, worn-out violin. "Can you teach me?" the boy asked. His clothes were old, his shoes torn, and his eyes full of hope. The man smiled warmly. "Of course," he said. "But first tell me why you want to play." The boy thought for a moment and said, "Because when I hear music, I don't feel alone." The man's throat tightened. He nodded gently. "That's the best reason there is." The lessons with the boy became special to him. He saw himself in that child, the same hunger to express something words couldn't. And when the boy finally played his first full song without mistakes, the man clapped louder than anyone else. It reminded him that hope could be passed on, one note at a time. One evening, after everyone had left, he sat alone in the music room. The sun was setting, painting the walls in warm orange light. He looked around at the instruments, the chairs, the little signs of life that filled the place, and he felt at peace. He picked up his cello and began to play a gentle tune, a mix of sadness and joy, loss and love. It was the story of his life, carried through strings and sound. As the music filled the empty room, tears rolled down his cheeks, but they weren't tears of pain anymore. They were tears of gratitude. He thought about the cafe worker, the journalist, the director, and all the people who had believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. Every act of kindness had led him to this moment. He realized something profound. No one is ever truly lost if someone still cares enough to see them. Years later, the foundation grew into a larger organization that helped thousands of people. His name became a symbol of hope, though he never sought fame. He continued to teach quietly, always reminding his students, music doesn't just come from skill, it comes from the soul. And whenever someone told him they couldn't do it, he would smile and say, "Neither could I once." One morning, the cafe worker visited the music center. She found him sitting near the window, humming softly while polishing his cello. He looked up and smiled warmly. "You know," he said, "it's strange how one cup of coffee changed everything." She laughed softly. "Maybe it wasn't the coffee," she said. "Maybe it was the kindness that came with it." He nodded, eyes full of warmth. "Either way, it saved me." As the sun rose outside, they sat in silence for a while, both knowing that some stories never really end. They just keep playing in quieter, gentler notes. And somewhere deep in his heart, he knew that even though life had broken him once, it was kindness and music that had put him back together again.